We are bringing the last part of our series on ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Today's episode is all about shutter speed. Hey there and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace and you can find me on Phlearn.com where we make learning fun. So to start off, what is shutter speed? Well, it's one of the three fundamental components that controls the amount of light coming into your camera, along with ISO and aperture. Shutter speed is the amount of time that a physical shutter inside your camera opens and closes, and this exposes the sensor in your camera to light. The longer your shutter stays open, more light is going to come into your camera, resulting in a brighter image. And with a shorter shutter speed, less light is going to come into your camera, resulting in a darker image. Your shutter speed is exactly the same amount of time that your sensor is exposed to light. So if you have a 1 second shutter speed, the sensor in your camera is exposed to light for 1 second. Aside from how shutter speed affects the brightness of your image, shutter speed will also dictate how motion appears in your photo. The thing to remember is that motion is being captured in a single image by a camera. So if an object is moving, you're going to actually see that entire movement in your photo. And the longer your shutter speed, the more movement you're going to see. So if we're using a 1 second exposure and taking a picture of a spaceship, the spaceship is going to move a pretty big distance during that 1 second, and we're going to see it for the entire distance. Now let's speed up that time frame quite a bit to 1/4,000th of a second. The spaceship is still moving, but we're only seeing it for 1/4,000th of a second, meaning it's not going to travel very far in that short amount of time. So our subject is going to appear to be frozen in time. Using a fast shutter speed greater than 1/1000th of a second is perfect for capturing fast motion and freezing it in place, and is really easy to achieve when photographing someone outside. Now let's make our shutter speed a little bit slower to 1/250th of a second. This is going to get more light into your camera, which is going to be great for shooting indoors when you simply don't have as much light. Now sometimes there's just not a lot of light in a scene, so using a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second and slower, you're going to start to introduce a little bit of blur, so you want to take precautions here, like putting your camera on a tripod. And in really dark places, you can use a very long shutter speed. This image I took in California had a 45-minute shutter speed, allowing us to actually see the Earth's rotation blurring the stars in the sky. Now keep in mind there are two types of motion in photography. First is motion in front of your camera, like me right now, I'm moving around. The second type of motion is from the camera itself, and a long shutter speed will result in blur in both of these situations. So let's jump into our photo shoot and see how shutter speed affects our images. We're setting up a battle scene using Star Wars Legos. This is on the ice planet of Hoth, and we wanted to get a little bit of movement with our snow speeder here and the Empire speeder bike. So we rigged them both using fishing wire, which suspended them in air and allowed for a little bit of movement. We're using shutter speed to capture motion in the image, but we also need to make sure we have a proper exposure. And because we're shooting miniatures, we needed a very wide depth of field to make sure we had as much in focus as possible. Now we know our goals for the shoot, how do we go about building that exposure? Well, we started out with a native ISO of 100 because we didn't want a lot of noise in the photo. This was great, but we had to use a wide open aperture to let a ton of light into our image, which resulted in a very shallow depth of field. Not a lot was in focus. So we closed down our aperture, resulting in a wider depth of field, but on the flip side, it lets less light into the camera. So then we bring in our shutter speed. We're using a slow shutter speed, which is gonna let in a lot of light here and give us a proper exposure. Only downside now is that we have so much motion blur in our image, we really can't see any detail. Now it was pretty apparent we needed to use a bit of a faster shutter speed to get less motion blur. But with a faster shutter speed, we're letting less light into our camera again. So at this point, we brought in our ISO to compensate and make sure our exposure was spot on. So now we have all our settings right, it's time to have some fun. Our whole goal here was to create a realistic image straight out of camera. Now, I am gonna be combining multiple different exposures and doing a little bit of composite work, so stay tuned for that really fun Photoshop tutorial. Well, that's all there is to shutter speed. So the next time you wanna freeze motion, use a fast shutter speed. Now, the only downside there is it's gonna let less light into your camera, which means you'll have to compensate with your aperture and your ISO. Now, if you want to show movement in a photo or you need more light, you can use a slower shutter speed. But keep in mind, this will introduce motion blur. So you wanna use a stabilized lens if you have one, a tripod, and you can just simply tell your subject, hey, stand still for a second, I'm trying to take a picture. And remember, using a slow shutter speed can result in some really cool effects, like being able to photograph stars in the middle of the night. Thank you so much, I'll Phlearn you later. Bye everyone. Hey, that's the Jurassic Park theme song. Oh yeah, I forgot. Eat dust, rebel scum. We need Vader or something.
For sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah, get him with your tow hook. Luke is born in the South now. Oh, look at this grappling hook. Oh. Oh, where's my shovel? Oh, there it is. Oh, good, perfect. I'm glad we have a shovel. Let me just put that in my hand here. Aha, good. I have a shovel now.